They told me straight to my face, "You're too poor to get married." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't some misguided attempt at protecting me. It was a declaration, a verdict from the two people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. My parents sat across the table, sipping their wine as if my future was just a business deal they could veto. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that I already had the receipts. For years, they'd been dipping into a pool of money they swore didn't exist. And I was about to show them exactly whose pockets they'd been living off. I grew up in a house where money was always both sacred and taboo. We never had enough, or so my parents said. Yet somehow, there was always a new car in the driveway, or a vacation photo to post on Facebook, or a renovation project that magically appeared even when my father complained about his paycheck being swallowed by bills. It was confusing as a child. On one hand, I was told to switch off the lights, not waste food, not ask for expensive birthday gifts. On the other, I watched my mother walk through the door with shopping bags from boutiques we couldn't possibly afford. If I questioned it, I was told, "Adults handle money. Stay in your lane." As I got older, I started to understand that appearances mattered more to my parents than reality. They weren't wealthy, but they lived as though they were, and anyone who dared to poke holes in that illusion was quickly shut down. That included me. By the time I met Emily, I had already accepted that my parents and I saw the world differently. Emily wasn't rich either. She worked as a graphic designer at a small agency, scraping by with freelance gigs on the side. But she had something my parents never did: honesty. When she didn't have money for dinner, she said so. When she wanted to save for a trip, she actually saved. There were no smoke and mirrors with her. We built our life slowly, piece by piece. Shared rent in a modest apartment. Groceries split down the middle. Nights out that were more about company than price tags. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. And for the first time, I felt like I had something solid. So when I proposed to Emily, I expected joy from my parents. Maybe cautious joy, given their tendency to nitpick, but joy nonetheless. Instead, what I got was disdain. My father's words still ring in my ears. "You're too poor to get married." My mother followed up with her trademark sigh and a list of reasons why Emily and I were doomed to a life of struggle if we went through with it. At first, I thought it was just another case of them projecting their fears onto me. But the more I replayed that conversation, the more it gnawed at me. Who were they to lecture me about financial responsibility? Who were they to call me too poor, when I had watched them live far beyond their means my entire life? And then, almost by accident, I stumbled on the truth. The inheritance my grandmother had left me had been quietly drained, piece by piece. Withdrawals I hadn't made, payments I hadn't authorized, luxuries my parents had enjoyed, funded by money that wasn't theirs to touch. That was the moment the narrative shifted. No longer was this about whether I could afford to get married. This was about exposure. About ripping away the mask my parents had worn for years. About proving, once and for all, that the ones calling me poor had been living off me all along. And I wasn't about to keep that secret buried. When I was growing up, money was always the unspoken weight pressing down on our house. My father worked long hours at a job he claimed was thankless, while my mother obsessed over appearances, new furniture, dinners out, vacations that somehow materialized even when we were supposedly broke. If I asked too many questions about where the money came from, I got the same answer: don't worry about it. Focus on your studies. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had carved out a life for myself that wasn't glamorous, but was steady. I worked full-time at a job that paid the bills, I was saving bit by bit, and most importantly, I was in love. Emily and I had been together for 3 years. We talked about marriage the way most people talk about the weather. It was inevitable, natural, part of the rhythm of our lives. So when I told my parents I wanted to propose, I expected resistance about timing, maybe even skepticism about whether we were ready. What I didn't expect was their laughter. Not nervous laughter, not even cruel laughter, just dismissive. My father leaned back, smirk tugging at his lips, and said, "Son, you're too poor to get married. You can't even afford yourself, let alone a wife and a family." The words hit harder than I admitted at the time. Emily had a modest job too, but together we were stable. We weren't reckless, we weren't extravagant. The way he said it, though, made it sound like I was a child asking for candy I couldn't pay for. My mother didn't soften it. She just crossed her arms, sighed dramatically, and added, "Marriage isn't for people who scrape by. It's for people who are secure." You need to think about what kind of life you're offering her. I remember staring at them, the walls of our dining room suddenly closing in, the smell of my mother's expensive candles almost choking me. All I could think about was the hypocrisy. These were the same people who had borrowed money from me for bills more times than I could count, who always had some new gadget or luxury, even when my father claimed his paycheck barely covered the mortgage. That night, I lay awake replaying every conversation I'd overheard as a teenager, every mysterious envelope that arrived in the mail, every time my parents' bank account seemed magically replenished after a dry spell. I realized something I'd pushed away for years. Their lifestyle didn't match their story. And I had proof. See, a year earlier, when my grandmother passed away, she left me something my parents didn't know I had full access to. And in that inheritance, buried deep in bank records, I found a trail of withdrawals that didn't belong to me. The trail led straight back to them. The first time I opened the bank records, I thought it was a mistake. My grandmother had left me a small inheritance, not life-changing, but enough to give me a cushion, a safety net. She had always worried about me, said I had a soft heart, and that I'd need protection from the harshness of life. The account wasn't massive, just under $40,000. I hadn't touched it, partly out of guilt, partly because Emily and I agreed it was for emergencies only. But one day, when I logged in, the number was lower. Much lower. Almost $10,000 had disappeared. I scrolled through the transactions, my heart thudding. At first glance, they were ordinary. Utility payments, department store purchases, even a few cash withdrawals. But the dates lined up with something I knew too well. Times when my parents had claimed they were struggling and asked me for help. It didn't make sense. They didn't know about this account. Or at least, they weren't supposed to. That night, I dug deeper. I pulled the statements, highlighted every transaction, cross-checked them with dates. I remembered my father buying new tools, my mother showing off her latest designer handbag. The math didn't lie. They had been siphoning money from my inheritance, quietly, deliberately. How? The answer came faster than I liked. When Grandma died, the lawyer had sent me paperwork to fill out. My parents insisted on helping, since I was overwhelmed with grief. I signed where they told me to, trusting them. Somewhere in that fine print, they must have added themselves as authorized users. At first, I felt sick. Then the anger settled in. For years, they had painted me as irresponsible, unready for adulthood, too broke to deserve the things I wanted. All the while, they had been bleeding me dry, piece by piece, and treating it as their right. I didn't tell Emily at first. Part of me didn't want to admit how gullible I had been. But when I finally did, she didn't flinch. She just put her hand on mine and said, "You have to confront them. Not just for the money, for the principle." I shook my head. "If I just go at them, they'll twist it. They'll make me look ungrateful. You know how they are." She was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Then don't just go at them. Prove it. Collect everything. Make it undeniable." That was when the plan started to take shape. Over the next 2 weeks, I turned into a detective. I combed through 3 years of statements, compiling spreadsheets, printing receipts. I even went as far as pulling property records. That's when the final puzzle piece clicked into place. The new patio they had built, the vacations they flaunted, the debt they swore was just credit cards. They had been living my inheritance, and they had the audacity to call me too poor to marry. I didn't storm into their house with the paperwork in hand. No, that would have been too easy for them to dismiss. My parents thrived on gaslighting, turning my anger into overreactions, my evidence into misunderstandings. If I wanted the truth to sting, I had to let them walk right into it. So the next Sunday, I accepted their invitation to dinner. Emily urged me to be calm, to keep my face neutral. "Don't show your cards," she whispered as we pulled up to the driveway. The smell of roast beef and garlic bread hit me as soon as we walked in. My mother was already in hostess mode, smiling too wide, complimenting Emily's dress while subtly eyeing the price tag in her mind. My father poured himself a glass of bourbon before I'd even sat down. Dinner started like always. Small talk, veiled criticisms, and that undertone of judgment that never quite left the air. Then my father leaned back in his chair and dropped it, casual as a hammer. "So, have you come to your senses yet about the wedding?" I set down my fork. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "You know what I mean. You can't afford it. Unless you plan to have a potluck in someone's backyard, it's just not realistic. and dragging Emily into a life of penny pinching? That's not fair to her. My mother chimed in, sipping her wine. It's better to wait until you're stable. We just don't want you to repeat our mistakes. I almost laughed. Their mistakes had funded vacations to Florida, dinners at steakhouses, and that brand new deck out back. Mistakes, my ass. Emily shifted in her seat, but I gave her a quick glance that said, not yet. Instead, I leaned forward, voice even. So what exactly do you suggest? Wait another 5 years? 10. Until you decide I'm good enough. My mother set her glass down, tilting her head. We're just saying, marriage is a financial commitment. You need to be realistic. We barely scraped by in our early years, and it almost ruined us. I studied her face, the faint smirk at the corner of her lips, the way she loved holding this power over me. Inside, my blood boiled, but outside, I stayed calm. Interesting, I said slowly, because I've been looking into finances myself lately, trying to be, realistic. And it's amazing what you can learn when you dig deep enough. For the first time that night, my father's smirk faltered. Just a flicker, but I caught it. My mother reached for her glass again, as if needing something to do with her hands. Anyway, I said, sitting back, I guess you're right. Stability matters. And I've got some things I'd like to show you both soon, just to clear the air. The silence that followed was thick, uneasy. They didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't offer. That was the point. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. She knew. The stage was set, and they had no idea what was coming. The thing about my parents is, they were masters of isolation. Anytime I pushed back in the past, about their spending, about their judgments, they turned it into a private matter. Don't embarrass us in front of others. That phrase was a leash they'd used on me for years. So if I wanted the truth to stick, I couldn't keep it between just us. I needed witnesses. People they couldn't dismiss with a smirk and a wave of the hand. That's when I called my brother, Daniel. Daniel and I had always been close, though in recent years we'd drifted. He moved to another city, built his own family, tried to keep out of the endless drama that swirled around our parents. Still, when I told him what I'd found in the inheritance records, he didn't sound surprised. I always wondered how they managed those trips, he said. I knew it wasn't just Dad's paycheck. But you're telling me they used your money? Not just some of it, I said. Almost a third. And they have no idea I've tracked every cent. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. God, that explains a lot. Mom once bragged about helping you with bills. I guess this is what she meant. I told him I was planning to confront them. Not in anger, not screaming across the dinner table. I wanted to set the stage, line everything up, and then pull the rug out from under them. Daniel didn't hesitate. I'll be there. They won't talk their way out of it with me in the room. Emily thought it was risky. She worried that dragging family into it might backfire. But I knew better. My parents loved their image more than anything. If I could peel that image apart in front of someone they couldn't manipulate, the damage would be permanent. So I made a plan. The next Sunday, I invited everyone, Daniel, his wife, even my aunt and uncle who lived nearby, to dinner. I told my parents it was to celebrate Emily and me taking the next step. They lit up at the word celebrate, already picturing themselves as gracious hosts. What they didn't know was that I had a folder tucked into my bag. Inside, every bank statement, every highlighted withdrawal, every record that tied their luxuries back to the money Grandma had meant for me. When the night came, the house buzzed with voices and clinking glasses. My mother was in her element, fluttering around the kitchen, serving appetizers, making sure everyone saw her perfect life. My father played the role of charming patriarch, refilling drinks and telling exaggerated stories about his hard work. But beneath the smiles, I could see it, the small flickers of discomfort when Daniel caught my eye, when Emily squeezed my hand under the table. They had no idea the celebration was about to turn into a reckoning. Dinner had gone on long enough. My parents were in their glory, basking in the glow of attention, pouring wine like minor royalty. My mother launched into a story about how they'd sacrificed so much to give us stability, her voice carrying that rehearsed mix of martyrdom and pride. That was the moment. I cleared my throat and set my glass down. The room quieted, not immediately, but enough. Daniel glanced at me knowingly. Emily's hand brushed my knee under the table. There's something I want to share, I began. My voice was steady, but my pulse was hammering in my ears. It's about money, and family, and the truth. My father chuckled. What? Are you going to give us a lecture on financial planning now? I smiled thinly. Not exactly. More like a demonstration. I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on the table. The thud it made was louder than I expected, sharp enough to draw everyone's eyes. My mother froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. These, I said, opening the folder and fanning out the statements, are bank records. My inheritance. Grandma's last gift to me. Money I didn't touch. Money I respected. I paused, letting the words hang. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's smile faltered. And here, I continued, tapping the highlighted lines, are the withdrawals. Payments to department stores. Cash taken out. Even home improvement charges. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes widening. Wait. These match the dates you remodeled the kitchen. My mother's face flushed. That's ridiculous. I cut her off. It's not ridiculous. It's documented. For 3 years, you've been draining my inheritance. The same inheritance you told me was too small to worry about. The same inheritance you swore you had no claim to. The room was silent except for the sound of my aunt shifting uncomfortably in her chair. My father finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. You don't understand how these things work. Family share. Your grandmother would have wanted. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare drag her into this. She left it to me because she knew. She knew you'd bleed me dry if you had the chance. And she was right. For the first time, my father's mask cracked. He didn't have a comeback, just a clenched jaw and eyes that darted away from mine. Emily leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. You called him too poor to get married, while you were funding your vacations with money that wasn't yours. My aunt gasped softly. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. My mother tried one last defense, her voice trembling. We only borrowed it. We always planned to pay it back. I slid the final page across the table, an itemized list of every cent, every date, every indulgence. Then explain this. Explain why the balance is nearly gone. Explain why you never once told me. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was on them. And for the first time in my life, my parents had nothing to say. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. My mother's hand trembled as she set her fork down, her perfectly painted nails clinking against the plate. My father leaned back, gripping his glass of bourbon so tightly his knuckles turned white. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. This is being blown out of proportion. You think we don't know what sacrifice looks like? You think raising you cost nothing? That inheritance was partial repayment for everything we poured into you. Daniel barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. Repayment? Don't make me laugh. You never called it a loan, never asked permission, you just took. That's theft, Dad. Plain and simple. My aunt's eyes darted between us. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Is that true? You spent his inheritance. My mother jumped in, voice trembling but determined. We borrowed. Families help each other. He's twisting it to make us look bad. Emily's voice was calm but cold as steel. So where's the repayment plan? Where's the record of you setting aside money to give back what you took? Because from what I see, she gestured to the papers. It was dinners, vacations, handbags, not bills. Not emergencies. Indulgences. The words cut deep. My mother's mouth opened, but no words came out. My father looked like he wanted to slam his fist on the table, but even he knew it would only prove my point. Daniel leaned forward, pinning them both with his stare. You shamed him for wanting to marry Emily, told him he was too poor, while you lived off his account. You don't get to play victims here. The tension in the room was electric. My uncle muttered something under his breath, shaking his head in disgust. My aunt finally spoke, her voice low but firm. I can't believe this. All those years, you bragged about being financially wise, and this is what it was. My mother's eyes darted around the table, desperate for an ally. But no one came. For once, the performance didn't land. The audience wasn't buying it. I took a deep breath, my voice steady. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to remind me of my place, to make me feel small. But here's the truth. You weren't protecting me from poverty. You were hiding the fact that you created it. You drained me and then called me poor. My father slammed his glass down at last, liquid splashing onto the table. Enough. You don't know what it's like to provide for a family. You've never carried that weight. Daniel didn't flinch. Neither did you. You just shifted the weight onto him. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time, my parents were cornered, their carefully built facade crumbling under the weight of witnesses and evidence. And I knew this was only the beginning. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but nothing quite captured the raw electricity of watching their lies unravel in real time. The silence after Daniel's words stretched like a rope pulled to its breaking point. My parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them, stripped of their performance, naked in front of the very people whose approval they'd always craved. I took a slow breath, then pushed the folder closer to them. This isn't just a family argument anymore. It's fraud. Theft. You signed documents you had no right to touch, and you siphoned away money that was meant for me. My mother's voice cracked. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. I cut in sharply. And you know I would. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I've got every document lined up, every withdrawal, every date. If you think I won't drag this into court, you're wrong. The color drained from her face. My father shifted, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Honestly, maybe that's what it'll take. Because you two clearly don't understand shame, only consequences. Emily's hand rested lightly on mine, grounding me, but I didn't need reassurance. For once, I wasn't the kid begging to be heard. I was the one dictating terms. I looked directly at my father. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to acknowledge what you did. Out loud. No more gaslighting. No more twisting it into me being ungrateful. You took my inheritance, and you used it to fund your lives. Say it. My father's nostrils flared, his eyes burning. You think you can order me around in my own house? I didn't blink. Say it, or I'll file charges. And when the bank subpoenas these records, when the lawyer pulls the trail, you'll have more than just embarrassment to deal with. For the first time, he looked away. My mother placed a trembling hand on his arm, whispering something I couldn't catch. Finally, he muttered, "Fine. We took it. Happy now?" "No," I said coldly. "But it's a start." My aunt shook her head in disbelief. "I don't even know who you two are anymore." The room felt heavy, but beneath it all, I felt something else blooming in my chest. Control. For once, they weren't holding the reins. "I want it repaid," I said firmly. "Every dollar. I don't care if it takes you a year or 10, but you will repay it. And if you so much as miss one installment, I'll make sure the entire neighborhood knows exactly how you funded your perfect life." The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents stared at me like I was a stranger, and maybe I was. Because the son they thought they could control no longer existed. This was me now, and I wasn't backing down. After my ultimatum, the room felt split in two. On one side, the family I had known my whole life. On the other, two people who had just lost control of their carefully managed image. My mother's eyes welled up, my father's chest heaved, and the rest of the relatives sat frozen, as if they couldn't believe the performance had finally collapsed. But instead of admitting defeat and agreeing to my terms, my parents defaulted to their oldest weapons, emotional warfare. My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. We did this for the family, so that we could have more, so that you wouldn't struggle like we did. You can't just tear us apart like this in front of everyone." Her tears fell easily, but they weren't for me. They were a shield, a tool she'd used my whole life to twist sympathy to her side. My father, on the other hand, chose threats. His tone turned sharp, almost venomous. "So this is what you want? To destroy us? To let everyone know your parents are thieves? You'd really drag us into ruin just to make a point?" It wasn't fear for me. It was panic about losing status, about neighbors whispering, about their reputation collapsing under the truth. Inside, three emotions churned in me at once. Fury, for the years of lies and humiliation. Exhaustion, from carrying the weight of their manipulations for so long. And, against my better judgment, a flicker of pity, because even in this moment, they were still my parents. But layered over all of it was relief. For once, I didn't have to play the obedient son anymore. "If all you care about is appearances," I said evenly, "then let the truth be seen. I'm not asking you to grovel. I'm demanding what was stolen. Repay it willingly, or I'll take it to court." My father tried to pivot, his voice slippery. "Let's make a deal. We'll pay some back now, quietly. You keep this in the family, and we'll restore order." But I knew better. Deals with them were nothing but empty promises and delays. I shook my head. "No more words. I want a signed agreement. A repayment plan, notarized. Otherwise, this conversation ends with the police." The color drained from my mother's face. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. My father glared, his eyes burning with a mix of rage and desperation. When the pen finally touched the paper, my mother nearly collapsed. She whispered, "I won't sign this," her hand trembling. My father hissed, "You don't know the doors you're closing, son." But I didn't blink. I slid the pen into her hand, and with a shaking scrawl, she signed. For a moment, the victory felt hollow, like burning down a bridge you can never rebuild. The relatives sat in stunned silence, as though witnessing the end of something sacred. And then, out of nowhere, a sound cut through the silence. My mother's phone buzzed on the table. A message lit up the screen. Did he sign? Good. I'll be there soon. My blood ran cold. Someone else was involved. And this wasn't just about money anymore. The text on my mother's phone burned into my mind. Did he sign? Good. I'll be there soon. For a second, I thought maybe it was nothing, an unrelated message, a coincidence. But the way my mother's face drained of color told me otherwise. She snatched the phone off the table like it was a lifeline, her fingers fumbling to lock the screen. I leaned forward. Who was that? Her lips parted, but no sound came. My father cleared his throat, trying to recover composure. It's none of your concern. Private matters. Daniel shot up from his chair. Private? Someone's texting about the money you just admitted stealing. That's not private anymore. The air in the room tightened. My aunt and uncle looked bewildered, whispering to each other, while Emily's hand gripped mine under the table. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, grounding me. I held my gaze on my parents. Who's coming here? Who else knew about this account? My mother finally snapped, her voice shrill. It's not what you think. Then explain, I said flatly. Before she could, the sound of a car, doors slamming echoed from the driveway. Heavy footsteps followed. Everyone froze. Moments later, the front door swung open, and in walked a man I hadn't seen in years, my father's younger brother, Uncle Robert. He wasn't smiling. His eyes scanned the room, landing on me. Then the folder of papers spread across the table. So, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel, he knows. The silence was deafening. My father stood, his voice low. Robert, this isn't the time. Robert raised a hand to cut him off. No, this is exactly the time. You've been lying long enough. If he's finally dug it up, better he hears the whole story from me than from a lawyer. I felt my stomach twist. What story? Robert's gaze fixed on me. That inheritance wasn't just your grandmother's money. There were other funds mixed in. Investments your father and I made years ago. Let's just say not everything was legal. Your parents weren't the only ones spending what wasn't theirs. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel muttered a curse under his breath. Emily stared at me, her eyes wide. I forced myself to speak, my throat dry. So what? You're saying I inherited dirty money. Robert shook his head. Not all of it, but enough that if you go public, if you take this to court, it won't just be your parents on the hook. It'll drag me down too. And trust me, you don't want the people I was dealing with asking why their name is suddenly showing up in subpoenas. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about family shame or repayment anymore. It was bigger, darker. My parents looked terrified, my mother clutching her phone like a weapon she couldn't use. I glanced at Daniel, who looked ready to explode, and then at Emily, who whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Now what? I didn't have an answer yet. But one thing was clear. The fight had just escalated into something I never saw coming. The weight of Robert's words pressed down on the room like a storm cloud. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction, as if I suddenly had the power to decide whether the entire family would implode. I looked at my parents first. My father wouldn't meet my eyes, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. My mother's hands trembled around her phone, her face pale as ash. Then at Robert, calm, almost smug, like he had just placed me in checkmate. You're trying to scare me, I said finally. But you don't get to use your mistakes to bury mine. Robert smirked. This isn't about burying you. It's about protecting all of us. You think dragging your parents to court will make you look noble? Once those records hit a judge's desk, names start spilling. My contacts, my deals, they'll all come crawling into your life. And they don't forgive. They don't forget. The threat hung in the air, cold and heavy. Daniel broke the silence, his voice sharp. So what? He's supposed to just roll over? Let them steal from him because you're afraid of your own mess. Robert's eyes flicked to Daniel. It's not just about him anymore. It's about keeping things safe. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. Her whisper was steady. Don't let him corner you. This is exactly what they've always done. Intimidate, guilt, distract. She was right. For years, I had been trapped in their orbit, pulled in by fear, shame, manipulation. And now I was standing at the edge of something far bigger than family drama. I stood, slowly, deliberately. Here's how this is going to go. I don't care about your shady investments, Robert. That's on you. What I do care about is the money that was meant for me. And if you think threats are going to silence me, you've underestimated just how far I'm willing to go. My father finally snapped, slamming his fist on the table. You're tearing this family apart. I spun to face him. No, you did. When you stole from me. When you lied to me. When you tried to convince me I was too poor to live my own life. Don't you dare pin this on me. The room went dead quiet. My aunt looked horrified. Daniel nodded slowly, proud. Emily's eyes shone with fire. Robert leaned back, studying me. For the first time, his smirk faltered. You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But guts don't keep you safe. Neither does silence. I shot back. I gathered the folder, tucking the papers back inside. My voice was steady, almost calm. You all think you hold the power here. But the truth is, you've already lost it. Whether I take this to court tomorrow or wait until the world's watching, you'll pay. One way or another. And with that, I walked out, Emily at my side, Daniel following close behind. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices rising, panic setting in. For the first time, it wasn't my panic. It was theirs. In the days that followed, the house that once felt like a prison of expectations became nothing more than an echo of the lies my parents had built. I didn't go back, not to check on them, not to negotiate, not to soothe. For the first time in my life, their voices weren't the ones steering my choices. Daniel called me that week. They're panicking, he said. Mom's been trying to spin it to everyone. Says you blindsided them, humiliated them. But nobody's buying it. Everyone saw the papers. Everyone knows. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But sympathy is hard to summon when you're staring at the ashes of your trust. Emily and I spent those nights at our kitchen table, papers spread out, building a plan for the future. Not one built on their money. God knows I wanted nothing more to do with it, but on ours. She looked at me the way my parents never did. Not as a burden, not as a liability, but as a man with enough. Enough to stand on my own 2 feet. Enough to be her partner. And then something shifted in me. For years, I believed wealth was the key to respect. My parents hammered it into me, drilled the idea that without money, without appearances, I was nothing. But in exposing them, I realized it wasn't money that gave me power. It was truth. It was finally stepping out from behind their shadow and refusing to be their scapegoat. Did they repay me? Eventually, piece by bitter piece, with Daniel keeping the pressure on. But by the time the first check arrived, I didn't care about the money anymore. That inheritance was poisoned the moment they touched it. What mattered was what it represented: control, dignity, freedom. And that, I already had. People in the neighborhood whispered, of course. Some pitted my parents, others pitted me. But pity is cheap. At the end of the day, I was the one who walked out with my head high, and they were the ones left choking on their own hypocrisy. The wedding? We didn't wait. Emily and I married in a small ceremony with friends and people who truly supported us. No grand displays, no rented luxury, no parents in the front row pretending to be proud. Just love, honesty, and a promise that we'd never play the same games. Standing there, looking into her eyes as we exchanged vows, I felt lighter than I ever had before. I wasn't the boy who'd been told he was too poor. I was the man who had forced the truth into the open, who had chosen his future over their lies. And maybe that's the part my parents will never understand. Money can vanish. Status can crumble. But once you've reclaimed your dignity, once you've shown the world that no one decides your worth but you, that's something no one can ever steal again. So that's how it all ended. My parents tried to convince me I was too poor to deserve a life of my own, while secretly draining the very inheritance that was supposed to protect me. I exposed them, I walked away, and I built something real without them. But now I want to hear from you. If you discovered your parents had been stealing from you, would you drag everything into the open like I did? Or would you keep it quiet to avoid destroying the family? Do you think I went too far by forcing them to sign repayment papers in front of everyone? Or was that the only way to finally hold them accountable? Stories like this don't have easy answers, and that's why I want to know what you would have done. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. And if you want more stories of betrayal, truth, and unexpected justice, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.